It was supposed to be just another hot summer day. The kids were laughing, splashing in the pool, and enjoying their break from school. Our neighbors had been kind enough to let us use their backyard pool while they were out of town. Something they'd offered plenty of times before, but this time something felt off from the very beginning. As soon as my kids stepped into the water, that familiar screech of, "Excuse me," cut through the air like nails on a chalkboard. Yep, it was Karen. She marched out from her side yard, arms crossed and sunglasses barely hiding that furious glare. She didn't live in the house with the pool, but apparently that didn't matter. She stood at the fence line yelling that her family deserved that pool more than ours. According to her, my kids didn't belong there because, get this, they weren't from the right side of the block. I tried to calmly explain that we had permission from the actual owners, but Karen wasn't having it. Just when I thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, her husband showed up. Not in casual clothes, in full police uniform. He wasn't on duty. At least I don't think he was, but he stood there, hand on his belt, asking my kids for their names and who gave them permission to be there. My heart dropped. My kids were frozen, unsure what was happening or if they'd done something wrong. And Karen, she just stood behind him with the most smug look, like she had finally won. I tried to stay calm, but my thoughts were racing. Why was he even here? Why was a police officer being used like this over a pool? And worse, on children who were just trying to cool off. What happened next? I never expected. The officer Karen's husband looked at me with a stiff face, like he was trying to decide if this was worth escalating. I stood between him and my kids, trying not to show how nervous I was. I kept repeating, "We have permission." The homeowners told us we could use the pool while they're away, but he didn't even ask for proof. Instead, he turned to Karen, who nodded like she had just handed down some official ruling. It was like they had planned this out in advance. Now, here's the thing. We've lived in this neighborhood for years. My kids go to school with hers. We've always been polite, always kept to ourselves. But Karen, she's always been a problem. She's the kind of neighbor who keeps a clipboard during Halloween, counts who comes to her door, and complains if your trash bin is out 5 minutes early. And ever since the family across the street offered us their pool to use over the summer, Karen's been acting like it's a personal attack. She's made little comments before about how some people don't understand boundaries or how privileges shouldn't be taken for granted. But I didn't think she'd take it this far. I mean, calling her husband in uniform to come intimidate a bunch of kids. That's a whole new level. The crazy part is, the actual homeowners texted me that morning to remind us the pool was ready and even left out towels for the kids. Still, as the officer stood there, radio crackling on his shoulder, my kids stood shivering in their wet clothes, eyes wide, not sure if they were in trouble. And Karen, she whispered something to her husband, then smirked at me like she had just checked off a box on her to-do list. That's when I realized this wasn't about the pool. It was about control. I could feel the eyes of other neighbors starting to peek through their curtains. It's funny how fast word spreads on a quiet street like ours. A few of them had probably seen my kids laughing in the pool just 15 minutes earlier. Now, they were watching a uniformed officer question them like they'd broken into someone's property. My oldest, only 12, tried to speak up and say we had permission, but his voice cracked and he just looked at me for help. I kept calm. On the outside, but inside, I was boiling. Karen's husband didn't threaten us directly, but his tone said everything. "Just making sure everything's in order," he said. But why was his hand still resting near his holster? Why was he staring my kids down like they were suspects in some crime? This was supposed to be a peaceful swim, not a confrontation. Meanwhile, Karen stood with arms folded, whispering things under her breath loud enough for me to catch bits, like some people have no respect and entitled behavior. But here's where things got even stranger. One of the other neighbors, Mrs. Henderson, An older lady who had always kept her distance suddenly came out onto her porch and called over, "That family was invited, you know?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension like a pin popping a balloon. Karen's head snapped toward her. The officer paused. I looked over at Mrs. Henderson and nodded a silent thank you. Karen didn't like that, not one bit. Her smile vanished, and her eyes narrowed. It was as if someone had ruined her moment of authority. She quickly turned and muttered something again to her husband, and this time he stepped back, clearly uncomfortable. But I could tell this wasn't over. Karen wasn't finished. This wasn't just about today. It was deeper, about old grudges, power, and whatever imagined wrongs she had kept bottled up. And now she had dragged her husband, the law, and the neighborhood into it. As Mrs. Henderson slowly backed into her house, the air around us felt even heavier. Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was fuming. Her cheeks were red, jaw clenched, so tight I thought she might actually explode. But she didn't yell, she didn't scream. Instead, she got quiet. And that silence felt even worse. She turned and walked back to her porch, still whispering to her husband, who looked more and more like he regretted showing up in uniform then. Just as I was about to tell the kids to grab their towels and head home, Karen pulled out her phone and began recording. "Just so everyone sees what's really going on here," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She angled the camera toward my kids, who were now sitting by the pool, wrapped in towels, clearly shaken. I stepped in front of her view and calmly asked her to stop filming the children, but she wouldn't back down. "People need to know the kind of people being allowed around here," she said, twisting every word like she was building some story in her head. I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes. This wasn't about swimming. This was about her trying to paint us as something we're not and dragging my kids through it to do so. Her husband stood nearby, silent, clearly realizing how bad this looked, but not doing anything to stop it. That's when I heard the click of a gate opening. The sound came from the far end of the yard, the side entrance. I turned, confused, and to my surprise, saw Mr. and Mrs. Collins, the actual homeowners, walking into their backyard with grocery bags in hand. They weren't supposed to be back. Until next week, Karen didn't see them yet. Her phone was still pointed at my kids. My heart started racing. If anything was going to shift the power in this whole mess, it was going to happen right now. I barely had time to process that the Collins had come home early when Karen suddenly spun around, probably hearing their footsteps on the gravel. Her phone dropped slightly, and for the first time that day, her smug expression faltered. Mr. Collins looked at the scene, his pool. My kids huddled in towels, Karen recording us, and her husband standing in uniform like he was on a call land. His face turned pale, then confused, then angry. "What in the world is going on here?" he asked, voice sharp but calm. Karen opened her mouth like she had a script ready, but Mrs. Collins beat her to it. "We told them they could use the pool while we were gone," she said, glancing toward us. "We left towels out. We texted them this morning, Karen." Karen's mouth hung open for a second, then she snapped back. "Well, I didn't know that. And I thought, well, I was just looking out for the neighborhood." She tried to reel it back, but the words came out forced. Her husband took a slow step away from her, looking anywhere but at the Collins. You could see the tension on his face. Now he knew this was spiraling, and fast. But before anyone could respond, Mr. Collins turned to him. "You're here in full uniform. Is this official business?" he asked. The silence that followed was deafening. The officer shifted his weight awkwardly, then muttered, "No, I'm off duty." That's when another neighbor, someone I hadn't even noticed standing at the sidewalk, pulled out their phone and said, Too bad I got the whole thing on video. My heart skipped. The stakes just shot up. Karen froze. Her husband looked like he wanted to disappear. And then the real twist hit. Mrs. Collins added, "This isn't the first time she's done this while we were gone." Karen's eyes darted between Mr. and Mrs. Collins, then to the neighbor with the phone. Her usual confidence had completely vanished. "That's not true," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "I was just keeping an eye on things. You know how people talk around here." But no one was buying it anymore. Mrs. Collins stepped forward, calm but firm. "You've reported made-up violations before? Tried to tell us who we should let into our own yard? Oh, you brought your husband in uniform to intimidate children. This isn't watching the neighborhood, Karen. This is harassment." The officer finally spoke up, clearing his throat. "Look, I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I didn't realize," but Mr. Collins cut in, shaking his head. "No, you knew exactly what you were doing. You showed up here wearing the badge, questioning kids who had every right to be here. That's crossing a line, uniform or not." The officer looked down, clearly ashamed. But it was Karen who looked like the ground might swallow her whole. Then came the moment no one expected. From behind Mr. Collins, another voice chimed in, someone we hadn't seen yet. Their teenage daughter Ava, who'd been staying with a friend but had come back early with her parents. "Mom told me Karen yelled at me too last month, remember? I didn't say anything, but she told me I didn't belong in my own yard because I had friends over who didn't look like they were from here." The backyard went completely still. Karen's face turned white. That was it. The pattern was out in the open now, and no one could deny it. Karen muttered something under her breath and turned to leave, her husband quietly following. But just before stepping off their property, she turned and said, "You'll regret making a scene." And that's when Mr. Collins calmly replied, "Only thing I regret is not speaking up sooner." After Karen and her husband walked off, the backyard slowly began to feel normal again. The tension that had gripped the air started to lift. The kids, still wrapped in towels, finally relaxed. Mr. Collins knelt beside them and apologized, telling them they were always welcome in his yard, no matter what anyone said. That meant everything, especially to my oldest, who had stayed silent the whole time, but now gave a small nod. Like he finally felt seen, Mrs. Collins gave me a quiet look and said, "We're going to talk to the HOA about this. Enough is enough." I didn't say much. There was a lot I could have said, but honestly, I just felt relief. Relief that the truth had come out, that someone had stepped in. And that we weren't alone. Later that evening, a few other neighbors reached out privately. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner, while others admitted they'd had run with Karen too, but didn't want drama. It made me realize that silence often protects the wrong people. But it also reminded me that standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, matters, especially when it's for your kids. The pool situation didn't just bring out a neighbor dispute. It uncovered deeper issues in our community about assumptions, control, and who feels entitled to decide who belongs. But now that it's out in the open, change finally feels possible. Karen hasn't been seen much since, and the HOA did eventually send out a statement reminding residents that property rules are not up for individual enforcement. The kids are back to swimming, this time with even more friends. And me. I've learned to trust my gut to speak up. And to remember that decency always outshines drama, even if it takes a while to rise to the surface.